Hey, Judge, and in all due respect to these wonderful panelists and my friends and colleagues, you've heard a lot about process and money. You really have heard very, very little about the relatively small number of Division I elite athletes in football and basketball that drive this multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. And I don't have the clip, but in A Few Good Men, Marine Corps Colonel Jessup responds to the cross-examination from Tom Cruise by saying, "You want the truth? You can't handle the truth." And unfortunately, for those of us who are sports fans, who love those fall afternoons in Death Valley or revel in the competitiveness and intensity of a Duke Carolina basketball game, we can't handle the truth because we love college sports way too much to admit that the system that has evolved over the years, as run by the NCAA and acquiesced in by its member institutions, is fatally flawed. In his 1995 book, Unsportsmanlike Conduct, Exploiting College Athletes, Walter Byers, who for 35 years served as executive director of the NCAA, and who literally built the modern-day system that we're talking about, had this to say, and this is the quote: "The college player cannot sell his own feet. The coach does that. Nor can he sell his own name. The college will do that. This is the plantation mentality resurrected and blessed by today's campus executives." Close quote. 35 years director of the NCAA. 16 years later, Taylor Branch, in his definitive article in The Atlantic titled "The Shame of College Sports," had this to say. And I would mention that Taylor is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author on civil rights. Quote, "Slavery analogies should be used carefully. College athletes are not slaves. Yet to survey the scene of corporations and universities enriching themselves on the backs of uncompensated young men is to catch an unmistakable whiff of the plantation. Perhaps a more apt metaphor is colonialism. College sports, as overseen by the NCAA, is a system imposed by well-meaning paternalism and nonetheless unjust. A whiff of the plantation, colonialism, exploitation of a primarily minority-based group of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds are descriptions used more and more frequently to describe this multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry attached to our institutions of higher education. Prior to the fall of 2010, when the so-called scandal hit UNC's football program, I confess to being skeptical of characterizations such as these. Didn't the players have it made? How could they let we fans and the university down by such selfish behavior? Nearly 4 years later, and after about a dozen cases of representing and advising college athletes in cases against the NCAA, I unfortunately come away cynical and disillusioned, not by these young college athletes, but by the system we adults have imposed on them for our pleasure and financial benefits. Now here's how the system really works. A college athlete is governed by a 400-page rule book of arcane, intellectually incomprehensible rules that governs eligibility. The athlete has no voice in the creation of these rules, no voice in the interpretation of these rules, no voice in the application of these rules. Yet, the NCAA, by leveraging the member university, has the ability to destroy a college career, label that athlete guilty of serious misconduct without a hearing or even a right to appeal, and ultimately can cost that college athlete his or her scholarship and chance to play as well as their reputation. The enforcement rules have increasingly drawn bitter criticism. The recent NCAA investigation of the University of Miami that Roscoe referenced deals with the unethical behavior of the NCAA in collaborating with convicted Ponzi scheme felon Nevin Shapiro. All for what purpose? To get a handful of college football and basketball players who took improper benefits from Mr. Shapiro, who, up until getting caught, had been hailed and honored by the University of Miami. Secrecy, intimidation, and an unjustifies-the-means mindset has appeared to many to be the modus operandi of NCAA enforcement. Secondly, these elite Division I athletes put in enormous amounts of time. Estimated, I believe, 40 hours a week in Professor Clodfelder's book, helping generate millions of dollars for our universities. And for this, they get a scholarship, renewable annually, so make sure you don't get on the wrong side of the coach. And no other extra benefit can be accepted by the athlete. And if that athlete is seriously and permanently injured while competing for our dear old alma mater, then tough luck. The term student athlete was concocted by Walter Byers and the NCAA to fight and strengthen the fight against any kind of workman's compensation benefit for the permanently injured athlete. After all, these young people aren't workers, despite the 40-hour work week. They're not employees, despite getting paid a scholarship. They're student athletes, and thus not eligible to receive benefits no matter how grievously they've been injured on the playing field. And while we're talking about improper benefits, which comes in the form generally of money, gifts, trips, and the like, over the years, the NCAA, in its Orwellian attempt to keep college athletes pure and fully invested in the principles of amateurism, have determined improper benefits to include virtually anything. The most recent example of this ridiculousness was a female athlete from the Western Athletic Conference who washed her car using a hose and water owned by the university. That was deemed an improper benefit, and she was required to reimburse the university $20. Actually, if you think about it, it's the athlete who gets punished, not the adults that create the problem. Were it not for the alumni, the boosters, the agents, the neighborhood buddies, the adoring groupies who end up giving these improper benefits to these athletes, there wouldn't be any violations. But it is the 19, 20, 21-year-old kid, and despite their size and talent, most of them are kids, who get hammered. And finally, there's the inevitable question of the scholarship providing the college athlete with the right to higher education. All well and good except for two glaring factors. First, the 20 to 40-hour work week or competitive schedule forces the students to select or accept a course of study that doesn't interfere with their practice and game requirements. I think the biggest lie in college sports today is that we put academics first and athletics second. You don't play 70 baseball games in a season as the UNC baseball team has done, and not do this without dramatically impacting the academic experience. Big-time college sports is all about winning. Just ask the coaches who've been fired or moved on because the wrestling team or the women's soccer team or the basketball team wasn't as successful. And of course, I have to say, it's all about money and TV. We know it. The best evidence is the bastardized Atlantic Coast Conference, now stretching from Syracuse, New York, to Miami, Florida. Traditional conference rivalries are beginning to disappear. UNC plays Clemson in football in 2014. Then we don't make a trip to Death Valley again to play the Tigers until 2026.
Lucky UNC.
Yeah. Oh, no, we were getting better, right? Finally, the rationale of, oh, we're giving them a college education fails in the face of the kind of academic scandals that we have seen at UNC and obvious attempts to keep athletes academically eligible through no-show courses and 15-page cut-and-paste papers engineered by academic counselors and aided by tutors. But maybe that's better than the course of study described in an article in the Chronicles of Higher Education by a University of Memphis football player, Daston Cathy. Cathy has taken on his way to his 5th year courses such as wellness concepts, introduction to dance, and a class called the Developing Adult, which he failed twice. Fortunately for Mr. Cathy, these count towards graduation in almost all of his classes. Over 5 years at Memphis, he has gotten credit for 10 phys ed courses, including yoga, kickboxing, free weights, and beginning tennis. The saddest part is, as related in this article, is that Mr. Cathy was admitted to college and couldn't read. He taught himself how to read using 1st and 2nd grade learn to read books. He was interviewed by Joe Nacera of the New York Times, who congratulated him on learning to read, and his response was, "Thanks, now I've got to work on trying to understand what I read." He is a 5th year senior at the University of Memphis. Certainly many college athletes get a good education, or at least a decent one. Many don't. And yet we continue to fail to face reality that the competitive edge and winning margin is going to come by admitting elite athletes whose job it is to hone their athletic skills and talents at the expense of true college education experience. Most of them won't go pro, but will end up with little or nothing in the way of a college education because of the time demands and dumbing down of coursework to make sure they stay eligible. I confess the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. My 4-year odyssey dealing with the realities of big-time college sports has severely diminished the joy and pleasure I developed over 50 years in my love for college sports. Whether it's a whiff of the old plantation, colonialism, or perhaps something more akin to the sharecropper system post-Reconstruction. The system we have now is exploitive, it's broken, and there needs to be unmistakable change and not a band-aid approach.